Good day and welcome to Big Bad Tech. I'm instructor Jim Pytel, and today's topic of discussion is timers executing the one-shot function. Our objective is to introduce the one-shot function and put it to use in some illustrated examples. This lecture operates under the assumption you've watched the previous timers lectures, all available at the Big Bad Tech channel. If you haven't watched these lectures yet, or only dimly recall their contents, please take the time, pardon the pun, to do so now. Recall that a timer is a control device that exhibits a time-based shift between the assertion of its controlling input and the activation or deactivation of its associated contacts. Timers can perform numerous functions, including but not limited to on delay, off delay, on and off delay, flash, repeat or recycle, positive or negative edge-triggered one-shots, cumulative on delays, and more. Today's lecture deals exclusively with the one-shot function, both positive or rising edge-triggered and negative or falling edge-triggered varieties. Before we dive into an in-depth discussion of one-shot function, allow me to perform a brief walkthrough and review of other common timer functions. My intention in doing this walkthrough is not to confuse you, but rather to compare and contrast their behavior with one another. Repeated exposure to this topic is the best tactic because similar terms are employed for different functions, and it'd be a horrible mistake to confuse one function for another. Expect me to revisit this exact same walkthrough of common functions every time we have occasion to discuss a new one in depth. Recall that a timing diagram of a timer executing the on delay or delay on energized function would look like this. When the controlling input is energized at this instant here, the associated contacts do not instantaneously switch to their opposite state. The normally closed time open contact remains closed, and the normally open time closed contact remains open. Only after the predetermined delay period t has elapsed do the contacts change states here. The normally closed time open contact opens, and the normally open time closed contact closes. When the controlling input is de-energized here, the associated contacts quasi-instantaneously revert to their normal deactivated state. The normally closed time open contact recloses, and the normally open time closed contact reopens. The on-delay timer could be used to turn another motor on a measurable time period after another has started. Compare this behavior to a timer executing the off-delay function. A timing diagram of a timer executing the off-delay function, sometimes called a delay on de-energize or DODE, would look like this. When the controlling input is energized at this instant here, the associated contacts quasi-instantaneously switch to their opposite state, just like a regular control relay. The normally closed time closed contact opens, and the normally open time open contact closes. However, when the controlling input is de-energized here, the associated contacts maintain the asserted state. The normally closed time closed contact remains open, and the normally open time open contact remains open. Only after the predetermined delay period t has elapsed do the contacts revert to their deactivated state. The normally closed time closed contact recloses, and the normally open time open contact reopens. Note the different terminology and schematic symbols employed by the off delay in comparison to that of the on delay. They're opposite, as one would expect. An off delay could be used to keep one motor running for a measurable period after you turn another one off. Note for this general purpose orientation, I've purposely simplified the timing diagram of an off delay timer. Compare this behavior to a timer executing the on and off delay function. A timing diagram of a timer executing the on and off delay function would look like this. An on and off delay, as the name implies, executes a combination of the on delay and off delay function. When the controlling input is energized at this instant here, the associated contacts do not immediately switch to their opposite state. The normally closed contact remains closed, and the normally open contact remains open. Only after the predetermined delay period T1 has elapsed do the contacts change states here. The normally closed contact opens, and the normally open contact closes. This is the on delay portion of the on and off delay function. When the controlling input is de-energized at this instant here, the associated contacts do not immediately switch to their opposite state, but rather maintain their activated state. The normally closed contact remains open, and the normally open contact remains closed. Only after the predetermined delay period T2 has elapsed do the contacts revert to their deactivated state. The normally closed contacts reclose, and the normally open contacts reopen. This is the off delay portion of the on and off delay function. A symmetric on and off delay timer means the on delay and off delay time period are equal to each other. T1 equals T2. To set a symmetric on and off delay timer would necessitate only one delay adjustment. In contrast, an asymmetric on and off delay timer means the on delay and off delay are not equal to each other. T1 does not equal T2. Timers executing an asymmetric on and off delay would require two independently adjustable delay periods. An on and off delay timer could be used to coordinate two motors such that motor B stops a period after motor A starts, then motor B stops a period after motor A stops. Note, for this general purpose orientation, I've purposely simplified the timing diagram of the on and off delay timer. Compare this behavior to a timer executing the flash function, sometimes called repeat or recycle. A timing diagram of a timer executing the flash function would look like this. When the controlling input is energized at this instant here, the associated contacts continuously alternate between the activated and deactivated state with a measurable period. Similar to our previous discussion about on and off delay timers, flash function might be symmetric, where the activation period is equal in magnitude to the deactivation period, or asymmetric, where the activation and deactivation periods are independently adjustable. A symmetric flash would necessitate only one adjustment. In contrast, an asymmetric flash would necessitate two adjustment points, one for delay period T1, one for delay period T2. The flash function could be used to create a super annoying warning strobe when a motor is energized, or perhaps timeshare a load between two different motors. Compare this behavior to a timer executing the one-shot function. A timing diagram of a timer executing the one-shot function would look like this. For a positive or rising edge triggered one-shot, when the controlling input is energized at this instant here, the associated contacts only temporarily assume the opposite activated state for a period T, and then revert to their deactivated state, despite the controlling input still being energized. This would be a rising or positive edge triggered one-shot, and essentially does exactly what the name suggests, and that the one-shot function is only enabled once for a period T on a rising or positive going transition of the controlling input. Alternatively, a negative or falling edge triggered one-shot is one that the one-shot function is only enabled once for a period T on a falling or negative going transition of the controlling input. One-shots can be used to assert an output for a desired time period following the energized or de-energized transition of another device. One-shots are particularly interesting because manufacturers occasionally include a slew of handy features, including resets and retriggerable versus non-retriggerable one-shots. Note, for this general purpose orientation, I've purposely simplified the timing diagram for rising and falling edge one-shots. Finally, compare this behavior to a timer executing the cumulative on delay function. A cumulative on delay timer is a record-keeping function where the timer does not temporarily shift the outputs, but rather keeps track of how long its controlling input has been energized. Only after the controlling input has been asserted for the predetermined period of time do the outputs respond. Note, despite the controlling input being discontinuously energized, only once the timer has accumulated the required delay period here do the contacts switch to their activated opposite states. Such a timer could be used to keep track of how long a particular controlling input has been asserted, and then alert the system that some maintenance or other task must occur. I like to think of cumulative on delay timers as little accountants that keep track of how long the controlling input has been asserted and continually monitor how much time remains in the bank before it activates the output. Note, for this general purpose orientation, I've purposely simplified the timing diagram for cumulative on delay timers. To be sure, there are other timer functions and twisted offspring of unholy unions of these common functions. However, these are more than likely the most common timer functions you'll run across. This orientation is intended to be general in nature and does not dive into specifics nor manufacturer idiosyncrasies. Be aware of subtle differences in different terminology used to describe the same features. Returning to the topic at hand, one-shots, you'll recall that a simplistic timing diagram of a timer executing a positive or rising edge triggered one-shot function would look like this. When the controlling input experiences a rising or positive going transition of the controlling input, the associated contacts only temporarily assume the opposite activated state for a period T and then revert to their deactivated state, despite the controlling input only briefly or still being energized. As the name implies, a positive edge triggered one-shot is triggered only by a positive edge. Alternatively, a negative or falling edge triggered one-shot is one that a one-shot function is only enabled once for a period t on a falling or negative going transition of the controlling input. While these timing diagrams illustrate the one-shot function in its simplest form, the truth of the matter is that not all one-shot timers are this simple. One-shots often necessitate external power and come with a slew of handy features. Being solid-state devices, the microchip conducting the timing operation often needs to be continuously powered up for it to execute the one-shot function, especially in the case of negative edge-triggered one-shots. The internal circuitry of the microchip would be responsible for keeping the associated contacts in their opposite state for the required delay period after the controlling input disappears. For this reason, timers executing the one-shot function often necessitate an additional auxiliary controlling input, often illustrated as a coil with 3 inputs, A1, A2, and auxiliary, B, or in. The coil terminals from A1 to A2 must be continually energized for the timer to properly function. The auxiliary controlling input now serves as the initiation signal for the one-shot function, whereas the coil simply serves to power the device. Additionally, some one-shots also feature separate reset inputs that serve to override the one-shot function while it's on a roll. When triggered by a rising or falling edge, the one-shot is initiated. However, if the reset signal is inserted within the time period of the one-shot is disabled and reset. The external reset signal basically says, never mind, and calls back a round you sent downrange after triggering the one-shot. Note, if you continually assert the reset signal, the timer will never initiate the one-shot function. For the purposes of avoiding unnecessary confusion, I'm going to be largely ignoring the reset feature for most of this lecture. This being said, you should be aware that some manufacturers offer this ability. Again, not all manufacturers use the same functionality and terminology as this general purpose lecture. It's hard to do, but I'm trying to avoid getting entangled in manufacturer specifics. It is your responsibility to interpret the timing diagram for your particular multifunction timer of interest. Finally, one-shots can either be non-retriggerable or retriggerable. As these titles imply, the differences have to do with if the one-shot is triggered again while executing the one-shot function. As previously, if a one-shot is triggered once, it initiates the one-shot function for a time period t. If the one-shot is non-retriggerable and experiences another triggering input, either another positive or negative edge, within the time period t, it essentially ignores it and proceeds executing this single one-shot function as if nothing has ever happened. In contrast, if the one-shot is re-triggerable and experiences another triggering input, either another positive or negative edge, within the time period t, it essentially says, oh, you want some more of that? Well, here you go. Here's some more one-shot, and extends the pulse width, the period of t, beyond the last trigger input. Since I introduced numerous supplementary features of both rising and falling edge triggered one-shots, it might help to review how external power connections, resets, and non-retriggerable or retriggerable one-shots respond to different input conditions using timing diagrams. Timing diagrams, if you'll recall, show how inputs and outputs relate to each other with respect to time. Consider a non-retriggerable, positive edge triggered one-shot making use of an external power connection without a reset. Let's say the timer is set to 5 seconds. Again, this is an externally powered, non-retriggerable, positive edge triggered one-shot without a reset set for 5 seconds. The only thing that triggers this one-shot is the positive going or rising edge transition of the controlling input. I find that highlighting all the positive edges in the timing diagram helps the analysis procedure. Let's assume each block on this grid is 1 second. Given the controlling input experiences a positive edge triggered event here, the timer executes the one-shot function for a period t, in this case 5 seconds. The associated contacts temporarily assume the opposite activated state. The normally closed contact opens, the normally open contact closes. After the one-shot period has elapsed, the associated contacts return to their deactivated state. Note the triggering input was a pulse longer than 5 seconds, but the one-shot still triggered only on the positive edge of the controlling input for a period of 5 seconds. Again, given the controlling input experiences a positive edge-triggered event here, the timer executes the one-shot function for a period t. The associated contacts temporarily assume the opposite activated state. After the one-shot period is elapsed, the associated contacts return to their deactivated state. Note the triggering input was a brief pulse, but the timer still triggered only on the positive edge. Oftentimes, manufacturers specify certain minimum triggering times. Again, given the controlling input experiences a triggering event here, the timer executes the one-shot function for a period t. The associated contacts temporarily assume the opposite activated state for the period t. During the one-shot event, however, the timer receives another positive edge triggering event. Being non-retriggerable, however, the one-shot simply ignores this additional triggering event and keeps executing the original one-shot as if nothing happened. The one tricky part of this timing diagram is experienced here when the timer experiences a loss of external power during an ongoing one-shot. Ordinarily, the contacts associated with the one-shot would assume their opposite activated state for a period of 5 seconds when triggered. The loss of the external power is kind of like a reset signal in that when the timer loses external power, the associated contacts instantly return to their deactivated state, thus overriding or resetting the ongoing one-shot. Let's try another example, only this time making use of a retriggerable one-shot. In this case, this is an externally powered, retriggerable, positive edge triggered one-shot without a reset, set for 5 seconds. Again, the only thing different about this example and our last one is that this is now a retriggerable one-shot. Really, the device behaves exactly as previously, with one minor exception here. When the retriggerable positive edge one-shot experiences a triggering event, followed by another triggering event during an ongoing one-shot. Ordinarily, the one-shot would execute a 5-second one-shot after the receipt of the first positive edge. The retriggerable one-shot, however, instead of ignoring the additional input during the ongoing one-shot, basically dishes out 5 more seconds of one-shot as we'd expect. As previously, if the timer ever lost power during an ongoing one-shot, the ongoing one-shot would be canceled and reset, and all associated contacts would immediately return to their deactivated state. The restoration of power would return the timer to service. Here's another timing diagram, only this time for an externally powered, non-retriggerable, negative edge triggered one-shot without a reset, set for 5 seconds. Again, this is an externally powered, non-retriggerable, negative edge triggered one-shot without a reset. The only thing that triggers this one-shot are the negative going or falling edge transitions of the controlling input. It may help to graphically emphasize these events. Really, this device behaves exactly as our first examples, with one major exception, being that it is triggered on the negative or falling edges of the controlling input. Note, because this one-shot is non-retriggerable, it ignores the additional input experienced during an ongoing one-shot. As previously, if the timer ever lost power during an ongoing one-shot, the ongoing one-shot would be canceled and reset, and all associated contacts would immediately return to the deactivated state. The restoration of power returns the timer to service. Finally, in the interest of completeness, here's yet another timing diagram, only this time for an externally powered, retriggerable, negative edge triggered one-shot set for 5 seconds without a reset. Again, this is an externally powered, retriggerable, negative edge triggered one-shot without a reset. As previously, the only real difference is when this retriggerable one-shot experiences a triggering event followed by another triggering event during an ongoing one-shot. The retriggerable one-shot, instead of ignoring the additional input, basically extends the one-shot as we'd expect. As previously, if the timer ever lost power during an ongoing one-shot, the ongoing one-shot would be canceled and reset, and all associated contacts would immediately return to the deactivated state. The restoration of power returns the timer to service. To set up a multifunction timer to execute the one-shot function, the technician must first choose the correct function and then set the delay period. Here's an example of a multifunction timer with both the 2-terminal coil and an additional auxiliary controlling input. This particular timer can perform 8 different functions, A through H, 3 of which execute the one-shot function, Although this particular manufacturer makes use of slightly different terminology, you should be aware of this. Function E, rising edge pulse, is a positive edge triggered one-shot that only makes use of the A1 to A2 coil input. A timing diagram of function E would look like this. Note the one-shot is triggered for a period T on the positive going transition of the coil signal. Note also that this timing diagram illustrates that if the coil was depowered while a one-shot was in process, this particular manufacturer instantly overrides the ongoing one-shot. The coil signal is kind of serving double duty as both the triggering input and the overriding reset signal. Given this behavior, this one-shot is obviously non-retriggerable.